The morning they found the third break in the same run of cable, I already knew what the fusion splicer was going to tell me before I opened it. And I still drove out there because a man does his job, even when the job has stopped making sense. You want to understand what I mean by undone. You have to understand what a splice is. You take two hairs of glass, thinner than the hair on your head, and you burn the ends clean with an electric arc. And you push them together at 2,000 degrees until they become one strand. Not glued, not taped, one. The machine measures the loss down to 1/100th of a decibel and prints you a number. And when that number is small enough, you have made two things into a single thing that light can run down without ever knowing it crossed a seam. I made 400 of those a week for 19 years. Not one of mine ever failed the test. Not one. Until they all did. My name is Dove Kessler, and I was the last line tech working the far south rings out of Tucson before they shut that yard down and told everyone it was budget. It wasn't budget. I know what it was. I've had a long time to sit with it, and I'm going to tell it to you the way it happened, in order. So you can decide for yourself whether I'm a liar or a coward or just a man who saw something the world isn't built to file a ticket about. Let me start with the yard, because the yard mattered. Ridgeline Communications ran the outside plant for half the county, the fiber. The copper still hanging in the old neighborhoods. The hut sites out past the reservation line, where nothing was but creosote and rock and the kind of silence that has a pressure to it. Our yard sat at the end of Los Reales, a chain-link square with a double-wide office, a pole yard, and a garage that smelled like hot rubber and burnt coffee no matter the season. There were 6 of us in the field when I started. By that November, there were 2. Me and a kid named Ansel Poe. Everybody else had transferred north to Phoenix or taken the buyout, and I stayed because I'm from here. My father dug cable trenches for the phone company when it was still the phone company. He put a shovel in my hand when I was 11 and told me the ground down here remembers everything you bury in it. And I thought it was one of those things fathers say. I don't think that anymore. The dispatcher was a woman named Corinne Vasquez, 61, who had run that board since before GPS, and she could tell you the pair count of a cable run from 1988 off the top of her head. When a fault came in, Corinne would read you the location, and then she'd read you the history of the location, every ticket ever pulled on that plant, going back to paper because she believed, and she was right, that trouble comes back to the same ground. So when the first break hit that fall, Corinne was the one who noticed the thing that started all of it. "Dove," she said over the radio, "this is the second break this week on the Sawarita run. Same sheath, different spot. You want the footage?" Footage means how far down the cable the fault is. The OTDR, the box that shoots light down the fiber and listens for the echo, will tell you the distance to the break within a meter or 2. First break had been at 4,110 meters from the hut. This one, she said, was at 4,110 meters. "That's the same number," I said. "That's what I'm telling you. But you spliced the first one. I've got your closeout right here. Pass test .02 loss. You buttoned it up Tuesday. So it's a new break near the old one." "Maybe," Corinne said. But she didn't say it like she believed it. And Corinne believed in almost everything eventually, because she'd seen almost everything. I drove out. It was maybe 40 minutes down past the copper mine tailings, where the land goes the color of a dead tooth and the road turns to washboard. And the fiber ran along an easement between 2 ranches that had been foreclosed and gone back to the desert. There's a specific loneliness to that stretch. Not empty is peaceful. This was vacated, like people had been there and the leaving had left a mark on the air. I found the handhole, a concrete vault sunk into the ground with a steel lid right where the map said. And I popped it, and there was my splice case. My case. The one I'd closed Tuesday. Green, sealed, the strain relief zip tied exactly the way I tie them, which is with the tail pointing counterclockwise because my father did it that way, and I never unlearned it. I opened it. Now, when I say a splice comes undone, understand what should be impossible about that. The two fibers are fused. To separate them, you'd have to break the glass, and broken glass leaves a rough, angled, shattered end that looks like a snapped icicle under the microscope. That's what a break looks like. That's what I expected. That is not what I found. Both fibers were lying in the splice tray out of the fusion sleeve, and both ends were cleaved. Clean, flat, mirror perfect. The exact 90-degree face you get from a good cleaver before you splice when you're about to join them. Not broken, prepared. As if someone had come out to the middle of nowhere, opened my sealed case, taken my finished splice, and carefully unmade it back to the step right before the join, and then closed the case back up, tail pointing counterclockwise, the way I tie it. I sat in that vault with my legs hanging in, and I looked at those two clean glass faces for a long time. Then I did what you do. You clean the ends, you cleave fresh, you splice, you test. 0.01 loss. Beautiful. I heat shrunk the sleeve, laid it in the tray, sealed the case, zip-tied the strain relief counterclockwise, and I called Corinne and told her it was up. "What did you find?" she asked. I could have told her. I want you to notice that I could have told her right there at the start, and I didn't. I said, "Bad splice. My fault. Fixed it." "You don't make bad splices," she said. "I made one," I said. She was quiet a second. "Okay," she said, and I heard her write it down. And that was the first lie. And I've thought a lot about how the first lie is always the cheapest one, and how you never know at the time that you're opening an account you'll be paying on for the rest of your life. The kid, Ansel Poe, was 26, and he was good. I want that on the record because a lot of what I'm going to say makes him look like a fool, and he wasn't. He was better with the new gear than I ever got, and he had the thing you can't teach, which is that he listened to the plant. Some techs fight the cable. The good ones let it tell them where it hurts. Ansel had that. He also had a girl, Marisol, and a baby coming in the spring, and he talked about both of them constantly, in a way that used to irritate me and that I would give a great deal to hear again. I didn't tell Ansel about the splice either. I told myself it was because I didn't want to spook him. That was true. It wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth is that when a thing is impossible, telling someone makes it more real, and I wasn't ready for it to be more real. The second time it happened was 8 days later, and it happened to a splice of his. Different run entirely, the Rita Road ring, north side, nothing to do with Sawarita. Corinne dispatched him on a hard down, whole business park dark, and he found the fault at a splice closure at the base of a pole. And he called me from the site, and his voice was doing a thing I'd never heard it do. "Dove, you spliced this one?" "Rita Road? No, that's your plant. You closed that in September, I think." "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, that's what I thought. Dove, the sleeves are off. All 12. They're just cleaved, clean, like fresh, like I never spliced them. But the case was sealed. It was sealed, man, my seal. And inside, it's like I never did the work. The desert has a sound when you're standing still in it, and the wind moves through the creosote. A dry rush, like something exhaling through its teeth. I could hear it behind Ansel's voice over the phone, and I remember thinking, it's out there with him. And then I told myself to stop, because that's a crazy thought, and I was not a crazy man. Splice it back, I told him. Test it, close it, come in. But how did splice it back, Ansel? He did. He came in that night pale under his tan, and he sat in the garage with a warm soda he didn't drink, and he said, "That's not possible. You know that's not possible, right? To unsplice glass without breaking it. That's not a thing that can happen." "I know," I said. "So how?" And here's where I made the second mistake, which was worse than the lie to Corinne, because this one I made to a man's face. I said, "Sometimes a heat shrink doesn't seat, and the sleeve slides and the splice gets stressed and snaps at the neck down, and it can look clean if you don't get it under scope." That's a sentence made of real words that means nothing. It's the kind of thing you say to make a younger man think the older man has seen it before, and it's fine. He wanted so badly for it to be fine. He nodded. He drank the soda. He went home to Marisol. I knew it wasn't a stressed neck down. I'd had mine under the scope. A stress fracture leaves a mirror and mist pattern, a smooth zone and a rough zone where the crack accelerated. What I'd seen was a cleave, an intentional, tooled, perfect cleave. Something had done the careful part of the work in reverse. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my father. He was 83 and in a home off Grant. And his mind came and went like a radio between stations, and I never knew which father was going to answer. I got the clear one that night. I told him not all of it, just that I'd found finished splices come apart clean, in the ground, out past the tailings. He was quiet so long I thought he drifted. Then he said, "Where past the tailings?" "The old Ostrander easement, Sahuarita side." And my father, who had put a shovel in my hand at 11, said, "Don't you fix those, Dove. Whatever's coming apart out there, you let it stay apart. Some things that come loose want to come loose. You go tying them back together. You're just telling it you're the one who joins things." And then the station drifted, and he asked me if I'd fed the dog, and we'd never had a dog. And I sat in my kitchen with the phone against my ear, listening to my father breathe and not knowing which of the things he'd said was the crazy one. I need to tell you about the map, because the map is where it stopped being a run of bad luck and became a shape. Corinne kept two maps. There was the GIS, the digital plant map everybody used, clean and current on the screen. And there was the paper. A wall of it in the back office, mylar sheets, hand-inked, going back to before I was born. Every splice point and cable run and abandoned, cut logged by hand, by whoever had the board that decade. Corinne loved the paper the way some people love a church. The week after Ansel's Rita road break, I went in early before he got there, and I asked Corinne to pull every spontaneous open ticket for the last 2 months, every fault that came in on a splice that had passed close out and shouldn't have failed. She pulled them. There were 9. Then I did something I'm not proud of, because it meant I already knew, some animal part of me, what I was looking for. I asked her to mark them on the paper, not the GIS, the old mylar, because the GIS shows you roads and addresses and it lies to you about distance. But the old paper is drawn to the plant, to how the cable actually lies in the ground, following the easements and the old rights of way that don't exist anymore on any road map. Corinne put 9 pins in the mylar, and they made a line, not a road, not a cable run. The cables went every direction, north ring, south ring, the business park, the reservation feed. But the failures ignored all that. 9 pins, and if you stood back, they drew a single straight line across the county, southeast to northwest, cutting across roads and rings and easements, like none of it was there. Like something was drawing a chalk line under the whole city. and my splices just happened to be where the line crossed the glass. Corinne stood back and looked at it, and her face went the color of the mylar. "That's the wash," she said. "What wash?" "There's no wash there. That's just that runs across 4 subdivisions." There was a wash. She went to the very oldest sheets, the ones so old the ink had gone brown. And she laid one over the top, and there it was. A drainage. An old arroyo, dry 100 years, filled and graded and built over decades ago, gone from every map but this one. And the line of my failures ran straight down the ghost of it, dead center. From the tailings in the southeast to she traced it with a fingernail to the northwest, where the line ran off the edge of the sheet toward town. "Where's it going?" I said. Corinne didn't answer. She'd gone somewhere behind her own eyes. Then she said quiet, "Aldous marked this wash. Look." And down in the corner of the brown sheet, in an old draftsman's hand, was a note beside the arroyo. "Do not splice across the cut. R." "Who's Aldous?" I said. "Aldous Reyes. He had the board before me, before Sanderson even. He drew half these sheets." She touched the note. "He wrote that in. That's got to be the 60s. Do not splice across the cut." She looked at me. "Dove, why would a man write that? That's not an engineering note. You don't write that about a wash. You reroute or you don't. You don't leave a warning." I looked at 9 pins drawing a line down a river that had been dead for 100 years. And I thought about my father saying, "Don't you fix those." And I thought about 2 glass faces, cleaved clean and mirror flat, in a sealed box 1,000 meters from any living soul. And for the first time, I let myself think the thought all the way to the end, without turning back. Every splice I've made across that line has come undone. And I keep making them. And something keeps taking them apart. And it's working its way toward town. "Where does the line hit next?" I said. "If it keeps going northwest, what's the next splice point on the wash?" Corinne measured it with the flat of her hand, sheet to sheet, and she got very still. "The last splice before the wash goes under the interstate," she said, "is on the speedway feeder." She swallowed. "That's the one Ansel's rebuilding Thursday, the big one, the 488 count. Whole west side hangs off that closure. I want to be honest about Thursday, because Thursday is when I could still have stopped it, and I didn't. And every version of this story where I'm not a coward ends on Thursday. The Speedway feeder splice was the biggest single closure on the west side. 488 fibers in one case. The kind of job that takes 2 techs a full day, tray after tray, splice after splice, each one tested. The whole thing a hymn of tiny fusions. Ansel had drawn it because he was good, and because it was overdue, and because nobody knew, except me and Corinne, that it sat directly on the ghost of Aldous Reyes's dead river. I should have pulled him off it. I had the seniority. I could have told Corinne to reschedule, told Ansel I wanted it myself, told him anything. I could have told him the truth that I'd seen finished glass unmade, that the failures drew a line, that the line pointed at his job, that a dead dispatcher had written a warning about that exact ground before either of us was born. Instead, I told myself a story. I told myself that 488 fibers was too big to be nothing, that whatever had been happening to little 12 counts and single repairs out in the vacant land wouldn't touch a live feeder in the middle of the city with traffic running on it and houses all around. I told myself the thing needed the emptiness, the vacated air. And Speedway was never empty. I told myself Ansel was better at the big cases than I was. All of that was me being afraid to say out loud the thing I already knew, which is the only real definition of a coward I've ever found a man who knows and won't say, because saying makes it his to carry. So Thursday morning, I let Ansel Poe load his van and check his fusion splicer and top off his coffee and tell me again that Marisol had felt the baby kick, that they thought it was a girl, that they were arguing about names. And he liked Josefina after his grandmother, and Marisol liked something newer. And I said Josefina was a fine name. And I watched him drive out to splice 488 fibers across a river that had been waiting under the city for 100 years for somebody to finish joining what it wanted left apart. He called me at 2:40 in the afternoon. The connection was bad. Speedway's a dead zone in that stretch where the wash goes under the road, and his voice came through in pieces. But I got enough. I got, "Dove, it's happening while I splice it, and I test it, and it's good, .01. And I close the tray, and I open the next one, and the last one's, it's undone. Dove behind me, it's coming undone behind me while I work. And then, quieter, under the static, in a voice I have heard every night since, "There's something in the vault with me. Down in the water's back. Dove, the wash has water in it. There's water at the bottom of the vault, and it's warm, and there's..." And the line went to that particular nothing that isn't a dropped call. Not a beep, not a tone, just the open channel, and the dry rush of the desert exhaling through its teeth, and under it, very far down, a sound I have never been able to name, like glass being pulled slow through more glass, like a thing being carefully, patiently, lovingly taken apart. And then even that was gone, and I was standing in the garage, with a dead phone in my hand, and Corinne in the doorway, with her face already breaking, because she'd heard it too, patched into the channel from the board. "Dove," she said. "Dove, that's the Speedway vault. That's the one on the..." "I know which one it is," I said. And I got in my truck. I want you to know I got in the truck. Whatever I became after that day, I did at least get in the truck. I just didn't know yet what I'd do when I got there, and neither do you. And that's where I have to stop the first part of this, because the next part is the part I've never told anyone, and I need to tell it right. The drive to the Speedway vault should have taken 25 minutes, and it took me 40 because my hands weren't right on the wheel. I want to describe that to you exactly, because I've never been able to explain it to anyone since. My hands were shaking, yes, but that wasn't it. It was that they didn't feel like joining hands anymore. 19 years of taking two things and making them one. And driving out to that vault, I felt, for the first time in my life, like my hands had forgotten the trick. Like whatever was undoing my splices had reached back up the line and started undoing me. Corinne stayed on the radio the whole way. She kept trying Ansel. She'd key up and say his name and wait, and there'd be nothing. And then she'd say it again. And I finally told her to stop, because I couldn't hear his name. He said into that silence one more time, without driving off the road. "I'm calling it in," she said. "I'm calling 911. I'm calling Ridgeline. I'm calling..." "Call them," I said. "But I'll be there first." I got off Speedway at the frontage and cut down the access easement behind the strip mall, the one that runs where the wash used to run. And even the light was wrong back there. It was 3:20 in the afternoon in November in Tucson, which is a light like a struck match, hard and gold and shadowless. But behind that strip mall, the light had a green in it, the green you get in the bottom of a stock tank. And the air had gone still in a way desert air does not go still. And I knew the animal in me knew before the rest of me caught up that I had crossed the line. Aldous Reyes's line. The dead river had a bank, and I'd stepped over it. Ansel's van was parked at the vault, driver's door open, the way you leave a door when you never meant to be gone long. His fusion splicer was set up on the tailgate, still powered on, the little screen glowing. His coffee was in the cup holder, and the vault lid was off, leaned against the concrete, and I could smell the water before I got to the edge. I need to explain about the water, because everyone I've ever tried to tell gets stuck here. That wash had been dry for 100 years. Filled, graded, built over. There is no water in a dead arroyo under a strip mall in the Sonoran Desert in November. There is no water table there. There is no source. There is nothing but rock and old fill, and the memory of a river that stopped running before the automobile. There was water in the vault. It was maybe 3 feet deep, and it was clear the way pool water is clear. And it was warm. I could feel the warmth coming off it before I knelt. A wet blood heat rising into that green light, and it should not have been there, and it went down. That's the part. The vault is a concrete box 4 feet deep. The water in it went down further than 4 feet. I knelt at the edge and looked into it, and the bottom of the vault was gone. And where the concrete floor should have been, there was just more water. Warm and clear and lit from below by nothing. Going down into the ghost of the river, down into the cut, down to wherever 100 years of dead water goes to wait. And Ansel was in it. Not floating, not drowned. He was maybe 8 feet down, deeper than the vault could possibly be. And he was suspended in that clear, warm water, with his arms a little out from his sides, and his tool belt still on. And his face turned up toward me, and his eyes were open, and he was looking at me, and he was alive. I know he was alive because he moved. Slowly, the way you move underwater. He raised one hand toward me, not clawing, not panicking. He raised it the way you raise a hand to someone across a room to say, "I see you." And his mouth moved, and no bubbles came out. A drowning man makes bubbles, a dead man makes bubbles. Ansel made none. Because he wasn't breathing water, and he wasn't breathing air, he was just held, suspended in the warm, clear nothing, kept. And around him, spiraling down into the deep water below his feet, I could see the others. That's the second part everyone gets stuck on. Below Ansel, going down and down, spaced out in the water like beads on a line I couldn't see, there were more. A man in a canvas work coat from a cut that hadn't been in style since the 50s. A woman, someone small. Farther down, dim shapes going gray with distance, dozens, and the deepest ones weren't shaped like people anymore. They were shaped like the memory of people. The way a splice you never finished is shaped like the memory of a joined line. Everything the cut had ever taken. Everyone who'd ever crossed the bank and gotten joined to that water instead of joining it to something else. And down at the very bottom, so far down, it was just a pale disturbance in the dark. Something turned. Something big. Something that had been patient for 100 years, and had all the time there ever was. I understood it then. Not in words, the words came later, over years, sitting in my kitchen. But I understood the shape of it, the way Ansel used to understand the plant. The way you understand a thing you can't explain to a ticket. Let me give it to you in the words I found later. Because I've had a long time to find them. The cut unmakes joins. That's the whole of it. That's what it is. A dead river is a thing that was cut off, separated from its source, from its mouth, from the rain that fed it, from the sea it was going to. It was unjoined, violently, by the drought or the grading or the men who built over it. And it never forgave that. And it hates a join the way a starving thing hates the smell of a meal it can't reach. Every splice I made across it, every 2 become 1, every .01 loss, every hymn of fusion, was an insult, was a wound, was me standing on the bank of the thing that had been torn apart and saying, "Look how easy it is, look how I join what I please." And so it undid them. Patiently, perfectly, in reverse, back to the clean cleave, back to the two that are two, the way it wanted everything to be, including the men who did the joining. Because the deepest join of all, the one it wanted most, was the one my father named on the phone, without knowing what he was naming. You're the one who joins things. A line tech is a person made entirely out of the act of joining. Take that away, and what's left of me? It didn't want to break Ansel. It wanted to unsplice him, to take the join out of him, and hold the two clean faces of what he'd been, warm and suspended and forever, in the water that remembered being a river. I knelt at the edge of that vault, and Ansel Poe held his hand up to me. And I have to tell you now the thing I have never told anyone. I could have gone in. There was a moment I felt it in my knees, in the shift of my weight toward the water, where the whole of me leaned toward going in after him. He was right there. 8 feet. I've pulled men out of worse. I'm a strong man. I was stronger then. And the water was warm and clear, and it would have been so easy to go in and take his raised hand and pull. And I knew, with the same animal certainty that had told me I'd cross the bank, exactly what would happen if I did. It wasn't a guess. The water told me. The green light told me. The thing turning at the bottom told me. If I went in and joined my hand to his hand, if I made that splice, one more join across the cut, my flesh to his flesh, the water would take it as the offering it had been waiting 19 years for. It didn't want Ansel most. Ansel was the bait. It wanted the joiner. It wanted the hands that had made 400 splices a week for 19 years and never failed. It wanted me, and Ansel's raised hand was the last splice it needed me to make. His mouth moved again. Down there in the warm water, unbreathing, my kid, my good kid, with the baby coming and the grandmother's name he liked. His mouth shaped a word, slow and clear. And I have spent 9 years trying to convince myself it was help, and I have never once believed it, because I read lips fine, and the word was not help. The word was go. He was telling me not to come in. He'd figured it out down there in the 8 feet of held warm water. Faster than I had up in the air, he'd understood that if I reached for him, it took us both. And if I didn't, it kept only him. And with the last of whatever he still was, Ansel Poe used his one held-out hand not to beg me to save him, but to keep me back. And his mouth said, "Go," and I went. I stood up from the edge of that vault, and I stepped back over the bank, back into the hard gold shadowless light of a Tucson afternoon, back into the world where water doesn't wait, and rivers stay dead, and glass doesn't come apart in sealed boxes. And I left Ansel Poe in the water, and I have never for one single day since been able to decide whether he saved my life or whether I let a man drown to save my own skin, and told myself he wanted it that way because I could not live with the other version. Both are true. That's the thing nobody warns you about. Both of them are true at the same time, forever. And you carry them the way the cut carries the difference. One clean face and the other clean face, held apart in warm water, never joined, never resolved. I sat in Ansel's van with the door open until the police came. When they came, the water was gone. Of course it was. The vault was a concrete box 4 feet deep with a dry floor, and Ansel's spliced trays laid out neat inside. And the sergeant shone his light down and asked me where the water was I'd reported. And I said there was no water, I'd been mistaken. And he wrote that down. They found Ansel's boots at the bottom of the dry vault. Just the boots, set side by side, laces still tied, the way you'd set them at the edge of a lake before you swam. Nothing else. No Ansel. The department worked it as a missing person, and then as a presumed accident, and then after a while, as nothing. Because there's a limit to how long you can keep a file open on a man who walked away from a locked vault in his socks and never came back. And the limit is shorter than you'd think. I was the one who had to tell Marisol. I've done hard things. That's the hardest thing I ever did. And I did it badly because I lied. I sat in her small, clean kitchen with the crib already up in the next room, half assembled, Josefina's crib. And I told her that Ansel had gone through into a vault, and there'd been an accident with, I don't even remember what I said. Water, a slip, a drowning, sort of, a something. I built her a story out of real words that meant nothing, the same as I'd built for Corinne, the same as I'd built for Ansel himself the night of the Rita Road break. And she wanted so badly for it to be a story she could live inside that she let me leave it there. And I let her. And I walked out of that house, having lied to a widow about how her husband died, so that I would never have to say out loud that he was still alive. 8 feet down, held warm and unbreathing under the west side of the city, kept by a dead river that hates a join, and that I had looked at his raised hand and stepped back over the bank and let it keep him. That's the lie I've paid on the longest. Corinne's lie cost me a little. Ansel's own lie cost me a night. Marisol's lie I'm still paying, with interest, and I will die owing on it. Corinne quit the board 3 weeks later. She didn't say why to anyone but me. She came out to the pole yard where I was pretending to inventory Splice cases, and she stood beside me, and she said, I pulled Aldis's file, the old dispatcher, Aldis Reyes. I didn't say anything. He didn't retire, she said. Everybody always said he retired. He didn't. In 1971, he walked off a Splice job on the wash, the same wash dove, down by the tailings in his socks. They found his boots. They never found him. And the man before him, Sanderson's notes say, the man who drew the very oldest sheets, went the same way, and she couldn't read the year. The ink's gone, but he went the same way. In his socks, boots at the edge. She looked at me, and her eyes were dry and terrible. It takes the joiners, Dove. It's always been taking the joiners. One a generation, near enough. The best one. The one who never fails a splice. It lets the little breaks pile up and draw the line, and it calls them out to the cut, and it keeps them. She swallowed. Aldis knew. That's why he wrote it. Do not splice across the cut. He wasn't warning about the plant. He was warning about us. And I've had that sheet on my wall for 30 years, and I dispatched every one of you across that line 1,000 times because I didn't know how to read my own map. You couldn't have known, I said. You knew, she said. Not cruel, just true. You knew before Thursday. I could hear it in your voice on the Sahuarita break. You knew, and you let me send him. There was nothing to say to that, because it was the truest thing anyone had said to me in my life. So I said nothing. And Corinne nodded, like the silence was the answer she'd come for. And she turned in her badge that Friday and moved to her daughters in Bullhead City, and I never saw her again. She sent me one card, years later. It said, Has it come for you yet? No name, no return address. I knew the hand. Here is where I have to tell you the part that keeps me up, the part that is happening now. The reason I'm telling this at all, instead of taking it into the ground, the way Aldis Reyes almost took it into his. The line is still moving. After Ansel, the spontaneous opens didn't stop. They slowed, the cut had fed. It was patient again, but they didn't stop. And Corinne's daughter's husband, before Ridgeline shut the yard, let me keep pulling the mylar because he thought I was a harmless old man with a hobby, and maybe I am. And every year, I put the new pins in. The splices that come undone in sealed boxes. the clean cleaved faces where a join should be. And every year the line creeps a little further northwest, off the vacant land, under the interstate, into the west side where Ansel went down, and then further, into the older neighborhoods, toward the middle of town, toward me. Because I'll tell you what I finally understood, sitting in my kitchen with my father's warning going around and around. The cut doesn't hate the place. It doesn't want the west side. It wants the joiner. And the joiner moved. When Aldous went down, the best hands in that county belonged to a young man named Well. Doesn't matter. When that man went down, the line moved toward the next best hands. And on down the years, and the line always ends up pointing at the same thing, which is whoever, in that whole county, is best at taking two things and making them one, and never failing. For 19 years, that was me, and I retired. I want you to understand that I quit. I put down the fusion splicer the month after Ansel and I have not made a splice since. Not one, not a phone cord, not a garden hose, nothing. I broke the trick on purpose. I let my hands forget. I thought, God help me, I really thought that if I stopped being the joiner, the line would point somewhere else, at some younger, better tech. And I hate that I thought that. I hate that some cowardly arithmetic part of me was relieved to imagine it pointing at somebody else's boots. But there is no somebody else. I was the last line tech in Tucson. They closed the yard. The plant runs on remote monitors and out-of-town contractors now. Splices done by rotating crews who don't know the ground and don't stay long enough to be the best at anything. There is no next joiner for the line to move toward. There's no younger, better hands for it to point at. There's just me, the last one, the best one there ever will be now, because I'm the last one there'll ever be. And every year the pins draw closer. And last spring I put in a pin 4 blocks from my house, on a splice I never touched. In a sealed box, 2 glass faces cleaved clean and mirror flat and prepared. And I stood over that handhole, in the hard gold light, and I felt the green come into it, just a little, just at the edges, the way water comes into a dry wash before you can see it, coming up from somewhere that shouldn't have any water at all. It's almost here. That's what part 3 has to be, because it's almost here. And I've had to decide what a man does when the thing that unmakes joins is 4 blocks away and closing, and there's one splice left in the whole county that it wants above all others, and it's the one holding my 2 clean faces together. And I finally understand what my father meant, and what Aldous meant, and what Ansel's mouth meant when it said go. My father died in the 2nd week of that last spring. And I want to tell you about it, because his dying is where the ending really starts. The home off Grant called me on a Tuesday. They said he'd gone in his sleep, peaceful. And I believe the peaceful part, the way you believe anything a stranger tells you about a thing you weren't in the room for. I drove over, and they let me sit with him a while before the county came. And he looked smaller than the man who'd put a shovel in my hands, the way they always do. And I sat and held his hand cold now, a hand that would never join anything again. And I said the thing I'd driven over to say, which was, I left him, Dad. Ansel, I did what you told me. I let it stay apart. I stepped over the bank. And I don't know what I wanted. Absolution, maybe. To hear him say I'd done right. But my father was dead. And the dead don't grade you. And I sat there in the quiet with his cold hand in mine. And I stung. I understood that I had gotten his warning exactly wrong for 9 years. And that he'd have been sick to hear how I'd used it. Don't you fix those, he'd said. Let it stay apart. You go tying them back together, you're just telling it you're the one who joins things. I had heard that as Save yourself. Don't reach for what's lost. Step over the bank and live. I'd made it into a permission slip for leaving Ansel in the water. I'd made it into the coward's arithmetic. But that's not what he'd said at all. He'd said, don't tell it you're the one who joins things. And I had spent 9 years telling it exactly that, every single day, by being alive and being the last and being the best there ever would be. You don't stop being the joiner by refusing to reach for a drowning man. You stop being the joiner by I didn't know yet. That was the thing I still had to work out. But I knew, holding my dead father's hand, that leaving Ansel hadn't saved me from anything. It had just moved the pin 4 blocks from my house. It had bought me 9 years and a debt I couldn't lift. And it had cost a man his life, and a woman her husband, and a girl named Josephina a father. And it had not, it turned out, cost the cut anything at all. The cut is patient. 9 years is nothing to a river that's been dead 100. When I left the home that day, I stopped going home. Not on purpose. I just drove. The way I'd driven to the Speedway vault, hands wrong on the wheel. And I ended up parked outside a house in Midvale Park with a half-assembled crib in the front window that had never been half-assembled. Josefina was 9 now. She'd have a real bed, and I sat outside Marisol's house for 2 hours, and I did not go in. Because I had lied to her about how her husband died. And I did not have the courage to unsay the lie. And that is its own kind of splice, isn't it? A lie is a join. You take the truth, and you take the thing you wish were true, and you fuse them at 2,000 degrees, and you close the case, and you tie the tail counterclockwise, and you hope to God it never comes undone. Mine was coming undone. I could feel it. Everything I joined was coming undone. On the same schedule, drawing the same line. And the line ran straight through that house in Midvale Park. And I understood sitting there watching a light come on in a 9-year-old's window that there was one more join I'd made that the cut was going to take apart, whether I helped it or not. And it was the lie. And it ran through that door. I didn't go in that day. I'm telling you the true version, and in the true version, I was still a coward that day. But I want you to hold on to that house, because I go back to it at the end. The pin, 4 blocks from my house, was on Cardinal, in the old part where the streets still have the Palo Verdes that predate the subdivisions, and the plant runs shallow because they laid it before anyone thought the city would come this far. I went out to that handhole every few days that spring. I know how that sounds. A retired man driving to a concrete box in the ground to check on it, like a grave. But I had to watch the water, because the water was coming. The first time, it was just the green at the edges of the light, like I said. The second time, there was damp in the bottom of the vault, a dark ring on the concrete, and the splice case inside had come apart 2 more clean faces, prepared, waiting. The third time, there was an inch of warm, clear water standing in the bottom. And it went down further than an inch, and I knelt on Cardinal Street in the ordinary morning, with the traffic going by on Ajo. And I looked into a concrete box, and saw it drop away into the dead river. And far down, small, patient, something turned. It knew I was watching. I understood that too. It had always known. The undone splices weren't just it feeding, they were it calling. 100 years of the same call, drawn in glass across the ghost of a river. Come to the cut. Come be unjoined. Come, let me take the join out of the best hands in the county and hold your 2 clean faces in the warm forever. Aldous heard it and walked into it in his socks in 1971. The man before him heard it. Ansel was different. Ansel was bait. But Ansel had heard it too, at the end, and understood it, and said go. And now it was calling me, 4 blocks from my bed, and I was 63 years old, and the last joiner in the county, and I had run out of younger, better hands to hide behind. And I had to decide what a man does. I'll tell you the 3 things I considered, because I considered all 3 honestly. And the fact that I considered the first 2 is part of what I have to confess. The first thing I considered was going in, walking out to the Cardinal Vault some warm morning, taking off my boots, setting them side by side with the laces tied, and going down into the warm, clear water to wherever Ansel and Aldous and all of them were held. I considered it not out of despair, I want to be clear. This isn't that. And I've made my peace. And if you're carrying that kind of weight yourself, I'd want you to set it down with someone who can help you carry it, not follow an old line tech into a hole in the ground. It wasn't despair. It was arithmetic again. The same cold arithmetic that left Ansel. I thought, it wants me anyway. It's going to have me. Why not go in on my own feet instead of being called out of my sleep some night with the water at my door? Why not choose it? But that's still the coward's math, just wearing a brave man's coat. Going in is still joining the cut, walking down and adding my 2 clean faces to the beads on the line. It's the thing it wants. You don't defeat a thing that hates a join by making the last join it asks for. Aldous went in. Did it stop after Aldous? It did not. Going in feeds it. Going in draws the next pin. There is no next joiner now, that's true. But I don't actually know that the line dies when I die. Maybe it just waits. 100 years of patience says it waits. So going in solves nothing. It only ends me. And I'd finally figured out that ending me was never the point. The second thing I considered was doing nothing. Selling the house. Moving to Bullhead City like Corinne. Running northwest ahead of the line the way you'd run ahead of a fire. Buying years. And I'll be honest, there were nights that spring I had the truck half-packed in my head. But Corinne ran, and Corinne's card still found me. Has it come for you yet? You don't outrun a dead river. It's under everything. It was under Bullhead City, too, probably. It's under everywhere a river ever died, which is everywhere. Running just means dying somewhere with no one who knows your name, and the pin still creeping toward whoever's left. Running is the same as going in, slower. It's still the coward's math. It still leaves the dead on the table. The third thing I considered was the thing my father actually said, the thing I'd spent 9 years mishearing. And it took me until almost the end to hear it right. Don't tell it you're the one who joins things. I had been telling it that every day by being the best joiner alive. And I'd tried to stop by refusing to join, refusing to splice, refusing to reach for Ansel, refusing to knock on Marisol's door, refusing. I'd made myself a man who joined nothing, thinking that would make me invisible to a thing that hates joins. But that's not what the cut hated. Read it again. It doesn't hate joining. It hates being unjoined and left that way. It's a river torn from its source and abandoned. And it takes the joiners because the joiners are the ones who could have rejoined it and didn't, who stood on its dry, dead bank making perfect little fusions everywhere, except across the one break that mattered, its own. Every splice I ever made across the cut was me saying, I can join anything I please, and I choose not to join you. That's the insult. That's the wound. 19 years of joining everything in that county, except the one broken thing right under my feet. The cut didn't want me to stop joining. It wanted me to join it. Not by walking into the water. By doing the one thing no joiner in 100 years had had the nerve to do. The thing Aldous forbade because he was afraid of it. The thing his warning was really hiding. Do not splice across the cut. He wrote that not because splicing across it was impossible, but because he suspected what it would cost the man who tried, and no one ever had. And so the river stayed torn and hungry and took them one by one for 100 years. I was going to splice across the cut. I was going to give the dead river its join back. I want to tell you how I worked it out, because it wasn't a vision or a voice. It was the trade. It was 19 years of standing over glass, thinking about what makes a join hold. You don't rejoin a river with a fiber splice. Glass is the wrong material, and anyway, the cut had shown me it can undo any splice I make in glass, in reverse, back to the clean face. It's the joiner it wants, not the medium. The material it can't undo is the one it's been collecting all along. People. The cut joins people to itself and holds them apart forever. Each one a clean, unjoined face, held in the warm, never resolved. Ansel, Aldous, all of them down the line. They are the unjoins the river has been hoarding, the two faces that should be one, held apart to keep the wound open, because a wound that never closes is what a torn river is. To splice across the cut, I had to close the wound. I had to take the unjoined and join them, not to me, not to the water, but back to the world they were torn from. And I finally understood what Ansel's go had really meant, because a mouth underwater can only say so much. And I'd been hearing it wrong for 9 years, like I'd heard my father wrong. Go. Not just go. Save yourself. Go to her. Go to Marisol. Go to Josefina. Ansel Poe held 8 feet down in warm water, unbreathing, with the last of what he was. Did not use his one held hand to reach for the world, or to beg me to save him. He used it to point me back at the one join that could actually undo the cut's work. He told me to go home to his family and close the wound he'd been torn from. The river takes people by tearing them from the ones who love them. And it holds the tear open forever. And it feeds on the joiner who could have mended it and wouldn't. I couldn't pull Ansel out of the water. That splice the cut can always undo. But I could carry Ansel back to Marisol and Josefina, not his body, his truth, and join him to them again. Close the tear he'd been ripped through. And a river can't hold a wound that's been closed from the other side. That was the splice. Not glass. The truth. The lie I'd fused 9 years ago. Coming undone the way everything I'd joined was coming undone, except I was going to be the one to undo it. On purpose. And put the true thing back in its place. And that fusion the cut could not reverse, because it wasn't across the water. It was across the two people the water tore apart. I went to Marisol's on a Saturday in the last week of that spring. And I want to describe the walk from the truck to the door because it was the longest splice of my life. I had with me one thing. I'd gone back to the Speedway vault the day before, the old one, where Ansel went down. It was dry now, ordinary, a concrete box in the ground behind a strip mall in the hard gold light. But down in the corner, where the county's evidence people had missed it 9 years ago, or where the water had left it for me, I don't know which, there was Ansel's fusion splicer. His, the one that had been glowing on his tailgate. Someone should have logged it. No one had. It had sat in that dry vault 9 years, and it should have been ruined. And it powered on when I pressed the button. And the last splice on its screen was still there. .01 loss. The join he'd made in tested seconds before the water came up. And behind him, it came undone. His last good work, held, preserved. The way the cut preserves things it isn't finished with. I carried the splicer to Marisol's door. It was heavy in a way a splicer isn't. I understood it was heavy, the way a coffin is heavy. Most of the weight is what you're bringing it for. Josefina answered. 9 years old, and I had never seen her. And she had her father's exact way of tilting her head to listen to a thing before deciding about it. The thing you can't teach, the thing that makes you good with the plant, and it went through me like the arc goes through glass. "Mom," she called back into the house, not taking her eyes off me, listening to me the way Ansel listened to a cable. "There's a man." Marisol came, and she knew me, and her face did the thing a face does when the past walks up the steps. And I said before I could lose the nerve, before the coward's mouth could open its mouth, "I lied to you 9 years ago about Ansel. I need to tell you the true thing, and it's going to be worse than what I told you, and I've been too much of a coward to bring it, and I'm bringing it now." And I told her, not the version that protects me, not water and a slip and an accident with a something. I told her about the cut, the dead river, the warm water in the vault. Ansel 8 feet down, alive, unbreathing, held. His hand raised, his mouth saying go. And I told her I had stepped back over the bank, and that I did not know to this day whether he saved my life or I let him drown, and that both were true, and that I had let her build a bearable story on my lie because I could not bear my own, and that I was sorry, and that sorry wasn't a payment on it. And I knew that, and I'd come anyway. I set the splicer down on her step. "This is his," I said. "His last good splice is still on it. .01, perfect. He was the best I ever worked with, and I never told him, and I'm telling you." My voice went then, all the way, 19 years of it. He didn't want to die. But at the end, he wasn't thinking about the water. He held up his hand, and he told me to come here. To you, to her. That was the last thing Ansel Poe did with his body. He sent me to his family, and it took me 9 years to come, and I'm here. I don't know what I expected. I expected to be screamed at, and I'd have taken it. I'd earned it. But Marisol did not scream. She stood in the door with her husband's splicer at her feet, and her daughter's hand in hers, and she was crying. And she said the thing that closed the wound, the thing that finished the splice across the cut. And it wasn't for me. She knelt down to Josefina, who was listening, tilting her head, taking it in the way her father took in the plant, and Marisol said, "You hear that, Mija? Your dad's last thought was you, not water, not being scared. You. He spent it on you." And she picked up the splicer and held it against her chest, the way you hold a thing you're never putting down again. That's the splice. Right there on the step. The tear the river opened 9 years ago, Ansel ripped from his wife and his unborn daughter closed. Not by me pulling him from the water. That can always be undone. Closed from the other side, by carrying his truth home and fusing it back to the people it belonged to, so that Josefina would grow up knowing the last thing her father thought was her name. That join the cut cannot reverse. You cannot cleave a child from the knowledge that she was her father's last thought. There is no tool for that. It holds at 2,000 degrees forever. I went to the Cardinal Vault the next morning, 4 blocks from my house, to see. The water was gone. Not dried gone, the way it was gone from the Speedway Vault after the police came. But this time, it felt different. It felt like a thing that had left rather than a thing that was hiding. I knelt on Cardinal Street in the ordinary light, and I looked into a concrete box 4 feet deep with a dry floor. And there was no green in the light. And the air was just air. November air, dry and clean, and going warm toward the day. And the splice case that had come undone was still open in the bottom. 2 clean faces waiting. And I did something I had sworn 9 years ago I would never do again. I took out my splicer. My own. The one I hadn't touched since Ansel. And I made the splice. I cleaned the ends. I cleaved them fresh. I set them in the fusion block, and I closed the lid. and the arc struck 2,000 degrees. Blue-white, and the screen said .01. And I heat-shrunk the sleeve and laid it in the tray, and I sat back on my heels in the dry vault, with my hands finally feeling like joining hands again. And it held. I've checked it every week since. 2 years now. It holds. .01, steady, light running down it clean, two become one across the ghost of the river. And the river doesn't undo it, because the river isn't torn anymore. I closed its wound from the other side. I gave the dead water back, the one joint it actually wanted. The joint it had been tearing men apart for 100 years to force some joiner brave enough to make not a splice across the water, but the join between a lost man and the people who loved him. Aldous never made it. He wrote, "Do not splice across the cut," because he was afraid of what it would cost. And it cost me 9 years and a friend and the last of my pride. And I would pay it again, because it worked. And it's the only thing I ever did that the river couldn't undo. The line stopped moving. Corinne's grandnephew works a monitor desk downtown now, and I have him pull the spontaneous open report every quarter, and there are none. 0 for 2 years. The pins stopped drawing. The dead river under Tucson lies quiet, joined, its long wound closed, and the men it held. I don't know about the men it held. That's the one thing I don't get to know. Whether closing the wound let them go, let Ansel and Aldous and all of them down the line finally stop being held apart and be, at last, at rest, or whether they're still down there in water no living man will ever see again. I like to believe the first. I've earned the right to believe the first, I think. But belief isn't knowing, and I've stopped pretending it is, because the whole of my sin for 9 years was building comfortable stories out of real words that meant nothing. And I won't do that anymore, not even to comfort myself. So here is the last of it, the closing image, since I've told you everything else. Marisol keeps Ansel's splicer on a shelf in her front room. I've seen it I go by now. I'm allowed, Josefina calls me Tio, which I did not ask for and did not deserve and answer to anyway. The splicer sits on the shelf, and it doesn't work anymore. It gave up its charge a month after I brought it, and never took another, like it had one job left in it, and did that job on the step that Saturday, and was done. But the screen you can't power it on. But if you catch the light right, coming in the west window in the afternoon, that hard gold Tucson light, you can still read the ghost of the last thing that was ever on it. Burned faint into the dead glass by 9 years of showing the same reading, 0.01 decibels. Loss, pass, Ansel's last splice. Perfect. The best I ever worked with. It hangs there in the window in the gold light, and Josefina walks past it every day of her life. And she knows what it means, because I told her true, and that's the join that holds. Not the glass, the knowing. That's the whole story. I was the last line tech in Tucson, and every splice I made came undone until I finally made the one that mattered, across the one cut that mattered. And it held, and it will outlast me, which is the only thing any joiner ever really wants. My father was right. You can't tell the river you're the one who joins things and then refuse to join the one thing it's asking. It'll take you apart to make you understand. Took me 9 years, and it nearly took the rest. Go home. Whatever you've torn, whatever you've let stay torn, because the true thing was heavier than the lie, go carry it back and close it from the other side. Do it before the water comes up in the vault 4 blocks from your bed. Do it while your hands still remember the trick. The river's quiet now. Let's keep it that way.